Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Bold Group April 2024 webinar, Inventory, It's What Counts. I'm excited to introduce our presenter for today, Nicole Deglow, a valued learning and development specialist here at Bold Group. Before we proceed with the webinar, to enhance your webinar experience with us, we are taking a blended presentation approach. The walkthroughs of information have been pre-recorded, but Nicole is with us here today during the webinar and will be interacting with us during the webinar for Q&A. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thank you for joining us on this webinar, Inventory, It's What Counts. I'm overjoyed to have the opportunity to share my inventory knowledge with all of you through this webinar. I was a Sedona office customer for 9 years and helped run a very successful small business. We adjusted our practices with our inventory to align with Sedona office, and I'm going to be sharing some of those practices with you today. I have gone ahead and pre-recorded parts of this webinar because we have a large subject to cover and I want to make sure that we cover everything. So we will be starting off by looking at the big picture, which is the inventory workflow chart.
This first section will go over the big picture, the workflow of inventory.
This inventory workflow chart shows how inventory moves through your business. You start by building the part into Sedona office. Then the part is ordered, whether it's for stock, a job, or a service ticket. The PO is made and then received when the part ships to you. The part is then either issued to a job or a service ticket through the warehouse or by direct expense. Now we have the big picture. Let's take a look at how we build the part. So let's start the process by looking at how we add a part into Sedona office, because that's really where the true process starts. So we go into the inventory section under parts, and then we go ahead and we'd click the new button. Now I've gone ahead and I've added our part in already. So we're just going to go over this part in particular. So when I added this part in, I made sure to put the part number up here, the part number being the manufacturer's part number. When I was a customer, we always used the manufacturer's part number. It was the easiest way to find that part with any vendor. Keep in mind the vendor's part number is often different because they have their own numbering sequence or numbering catalog. Then I went ahead and I filled in the description and the detail. Now, since I found this part on ADI's website, I made sure to hand type in the description and the detail. If you decide to copy and paste off of ADI's website, it may cause you problems because it may put in special characters, and then the program will not allow you to save. Make sure that you hand type in anything in these fields. So then I filled in the product line, the manufacturer, all the fields below. I got down to the notes, and I made a note about the fact that this is the back box that we use when we use this camera. Then I moved on to the invoice section, or the sales section basically. So the invoice description on both the sales and the service section autofills when you fill it in up above. I put in a price that I made up in my head because I'm no longer a dealer and don't know what pricing ADI has any longer. So I filled that in here. Now keep in mind, if you want this part to be used on a FSU unit or Sedona X Mobile, this box has to be checkmarked. If you want it to be available for sales, meaning that your salespeople can find it when they use WeSuite or sales automation, this box needs to be checked as well. Also, when you're selling these and you want them to show up into a job and you want them to be stock for a job, meaning that this stock items for job button would be checked, this box needs to be checked as well. So let's move on to the vendor section. I've already added in the ADI information here. Like I said, I found it on ADI's website. And then I put their part number in, meaning ADI's. Then I went ahead and put in the description, the purchase cost, and our list price, whatever that list price would be for you. And then the package quantity, and I hit new. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and we wanted to add a new one, we would do that here. It doesn't really matter what vendor it is. You'd fill in the part number here, the description, the cost, the list price, and then you'd hit add and then save. The reason to do this would be if you price shop before you purchase for jobs, When we get to the jobs section, I'll explain how you can toggle back and forth in between the vendors to find the best price. So we're going to look for a job that I've already created. And we're going to just focus on ordering the parts for right now. I've added some parts and they're all in the materials section. Now, the first thing that I would do if I imported this job or made this job would be to capture the original parts. The reason that I used to do this all the time was that way I could keep track of any parts that I had that were originally assigned and sold to the project. Once I clicked on the Capture Original Parts button, made sure to apply so it would refresh the screen, and then this working parts list and original parts list becomes available. So our thought process always was, what's the difference between what was sold on the project versus what actually ended up being assigned to the project? So we went ahead and we would use the parts capture button, and then these two available buttons showed up. One would be the original parts list. This never changes throughout the duration of the project. The working parts list is what you would add parts to as the project is going along. There's some other key features to note here. The main warehouse that is going to pull these parts from is this main warehouse. Ours is in Michigan, but whatever warehouse is listed here in your database is where these parts are going to pull from for stock, if you're pulling from stock. Also, we had talked before about being able to toggle back and forth for vendors. Now note that I have both vendors under ADI. So if I have a part set up with multiple vendors, I can click on that box and I can choose a different vendor. If you see here in the pricing, this is the cost, $9.99 versus $12.99. So I'll go with Grainger this time. So when I go ahead and order these parts, I'm going to have to make two purchase orders, one for Grainger and one for ADI. Right now, however, these parts are being pulled from stock. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to uncheck the stock box because we want to be able to order the parts. The best working tip I can give you is if you are adding parts to a project, add them here first, then, and also change whatever vendors you need in this section first before going and making purchase orders. If you make a purchase order, the purchase order is not going to assign the parts to the project. You need to do it here. Make sure you hit apply before moving on to the next section. So after we've gone through our warehouse stock to make sure that we actually need to order these parts, we'd go ahead and we'd go over to the tools section, and then we would click on purchase order and then right click. Keep in mind you can make multiple different types of purchase orders, whether it's for labor or for parts. Labor, for example, could be a subcontractor's labor bill. Let's say you hired a subby and you wanted to put a placeholder in here at a zero cost. So that way you knew that your subcontractor was going to send you a bill. And let's say you had to give them a PO number. But for today's purposes, we're going to go ahead and make a parts purchase order, and we're going to do one for ADI. Now, most of the fields autofill, so you're going to just want to make sure that you put in your correct PO number. We did our job number along with the vendor. Sometimes we'd add in the date, sometimes we wouldn't, it just depends. And then we would go ahead and add in the shipping method. A lot of the times it's UPS ground. And then keep in mind the parts autofill. Again, going back to what was said previously, don't put parts in here. Put them in the main part of the job in the materials section. If you go ahead and put parts into this section, they will not transfer to the other screen. And then you would go ahead and hit apply and then OK. So we're going to leave this job open and we're going to go over to the accounts payable section and we're going to go vendors and then we're going to go to ADI. So here's our purchase order. So all we're going to do is receive this. So at this point, before we fill in any information and save, we haven't affected our inventory at all. All we've done is sent out basically a note to our vendor to say, hey, we want to purchase this item. So now we're going to tell the system that the item actually arrived at our warehouse. So let's say we put our job number on as the reference number. Maybe we'll just do a -1. And then let's say we don't have our bill yet. So we're not going to touch any of the fields up here. All we want to do is say, hey, this one part came in, and it did. And then we're going to hit apply, and then we're going to hit save. So since we're not using direct expense, this part was not issued to the project. So let's go back and look at the project. We'll refresh the screens. We'll go back to the materials list. Note how it doesn't show any issued parts here. Then we'll go back to the parts reconcile screen, and it doesn't show any issued parts here. So we haven't done anything except received it into our warehouse. Now we're going to go ahead and issue the part to the project, because let's say today the part got there and it's leaving our warehouse. So we're going to choose the warehouse that it came in on, and then our phase code, and then we're going to pick which part we want to issue. So we're going to delete the selected row, and then we're going to go ahead and hit apply. Now the part has officially left our warehouse. If we look at the part reconciliation, it's no longer in red, it's in black.
So if we were using direct expense, we could basically skip this step and not have to worry about issuing or unissuing parts. The direct expense button is located up here. So let's say we're going to order this part, and we're going to direct expense it. So we're going to hit OK. Now we're going to go into our vendor. Let's say the part came in and we're going to receive it. Now up until this point, again, the part is not in our system. But once we go ahead and we add it to the system, meaning receive it, that's going to direct expense it and issue it to the project. So it's going to skip a step for us. Note how it says direct expense here instead of either receive or receive and issue immediately. So for quantity is 1, we're going to hit save. Well, let's go back and refresh our job. Note how the issued quantity is now 1. So there are pluses and minuses to each system. It depends on whatever way your company chooses to handle inventory. When I was with the company we always inventoried everything through a warehouse. It was nice to see the flow of everything move in and out of the warehouse. Also, it was very easy to pull parts off of a job, meaning going to the issuing section and then unissuing parts. When you direct expense them, it becomes a problem, and then you have to create change orders, and it locks the job, and then it takes away a bunch of the functionality of the project. However, direct expense is nice because you don't have to worry about issuing parts in the project either. They just issue the moment that they're received. So both have their pluses and minuses. It truly depends on the way your company wants to run their business and how they do their business practices. Let's look at how we order parts in a service ticket. Navigate to the equipment and parts section of the ticket. At least one part needs to be added in this section in order to order. Please note that all parts used in the service ticket should be added here. Unchecking the stock box allows the part to autofill when the purchase order is created. Clicking on the purchase order button will allow the purchase order to be visible in the top ribbon. Then create a new purchase order. Select your vendor. Then fill in all the required fields, including the purchase order number and the shipping method. Adding additional expenses, such as freight, can be completed in the Expense tab. Any notes can be added in the memo section in the lower left corner. Save when the purchase order is complete. Now the purchase order is visible in the purchase order button. Pulling a part from stock and putting it on a service ticket is a simple process. To add a new part to a service ticket, click the New button. Then select the box here. You can search the part by putting it in the search box. Make sure the part is checkmarked if you plan on pulling the part from your warehouse stock. Removing a part is easy as well. Highlight the part that you wish to delete, then use the Delete key on your keyboard and select Yes. Remember to save all your changes. Any and all additions or deletions to parts need to be made within the ticket. If you want to change the quantity of a part, do it here. Make sure to save your changes. Ensure that all quantities are correct before closing out the ticket. If an adjustment in a part's quantity needs to be made after the ticket closes, it can only be made by performing a manual stock adjustment. So let's look at how we do a manual stock adjustment. So we're in the part and we're going to go up to the warehouse that we used on the ticket. Note the warehouse is here, and take into account the quantity, which is 2. So we're going to right click on the warehouse and do a stock adjustment. So the idea is, let's say we're keeping today's date. The new quantity is the big issue. The adjustment date quantity and the current quantity are here. So let's say that we have a -2 on the ticket and we want to return 1. So our quantity should technically be 3. So we put the quantity in here. When making a manual stock adjustment or a miscellaneous issue return, the data entry form contains a GL account and a category field used for recording the expenses to the general ledger. For a manual stock adjustment, the GL account number will autofill with the company's default physical adjustment account, or in this case, the purchase price variance. This dropdown can be overridden by the user. The user must select a category for the transaction also. When performing a miscellaneous issue or return, both the GL account and category must be selected by the user. So here's our 3. Here's our category. Right here. We're going to go ahead. It's going to add the value that was already in the system. We're going to hit save. Are you sure you want to perform this adjustment? Yes. The same security permissions to perform physical inventories also control the ability to perform manual stock adjustments. Manual stack adjustments are performed from the Part Explorer record within the tree. If there are several parts that require stack adjustment, the user would need to open the Part Explorer for each part and do the adjustments one at a time. Now that we've looked at manual stack adjustments, let's take a look at repair orders and returns. And let's think about it in a real world scenario. Back when I used to manage my staff, we used to have a lot of conversations about repair orders versus returns. How do we tell the difference? Why does it make a difference? I used to tell my staff, let's follow the money. If we're going to return something and there's no money exchange between us and the vendor, that's a repair order. If we're going to return something, they're going to, let's say, send us a new one and charge us for it, and then send us a credit back for the old one, that's a return. I would also like to mention that if you decide to leave your repair order open, that repair order is going to show on reports. So if you truly send the part out, it gets repaired, and then it gets brought back to your warehouse, you really will have to go ahead and receive the repair order so that way it doesn't show as being an open receipt on your reports. Okay, so now that we're done with repair orders, let's move on to returns and credits. And let's focus on returns first, vendor returns. So let's use a real world example again. Let's say that you are going to install a camera that you've purchased for a job. You go to install it and it's bad out of the box. And let's say you've purchased this camera from ADI. Now I know from personal experience that ADI has a policy where they like to send you an advanced replacement. And it used to confuse my staff all the time because it sounds like you're getting one for one, you're getting an advanced replacement and there's no money exchange. So really, truly what happens is you bring the camera that you got for the install that's bad out of the box, you bring it back to your warehouse, you pack it up, you get your RMA number, and you send it out to ADI. Then what happens is while that camera is going back to ADI, ADI has sent you a new one in its stead. So now you have a new camera on your desk almost before the old one that was bad got sent back. So let's talk about how we make sense of that in Sedona office. So for the part that has to go back, we need to make a return because we need to show it leaving Sedona office. Basically, it's being removed out of our inventory. For the new part that's coming in, that part is a whole transaction by itself. It has nothing to do with the original part that's bad. So for a new part coming in, we need to make a new purchase order. We need to receive that part against that purchase order. And then trust me, ADI will send you a bill and you're going to put that bill against it. And eventually your AP department will pay that bill. Meanwhile, the bad one has gone back to ADI. You've made your return to show that it's left your inventory. And then when ADI has verified the camera is actually bad, they will send you a credit, and then that credit will close out your return on your end, basically giving your AP department a credit at the end of the month so they can offset the new invoice with the old credit. So let's shift over and actually look how to create a return. So I have a vendor here that I've chosen since we were talking about ADI. Let's use that one. And then I've gone ahead and I've already made a return. Now, if you're making a new one, you click on the return section and then right click to be able to do a new return or edit a return. So here are the two returns that I've made. This one is specifically for a camera. And I've put my reference number in here for our job. We'll just add, for ease, today's date so we remember what day it went out. You can use your own reference number, whatever your company signifies their returns with. Maybe you want to use the original receipt number from ADI, for example. That may help. You can change the date if you want. I have our job number on here, so I have a reference to know what job this particular part came off of. And I've also referenced that it was bad out of the box. And we can also reference our job number down here. So it's in multiple places in case we need to figure out where it came from. So we go ahead and we fill our part in the part section here. Make sure that you add the quantity. Mine is in there already since I've added the part. When you go ahead and you add a part to this, it won't automatically put the quantity in. So you're going to want to go ahead and do that and then hit save. Now that we've saved our return, let's take a look and see what the part journal says so we can understand the flow of inventory basically in and out. So I've already pulled up our part. Here's our camera, and I'm looking at our journal here. So this is me purchasing 10 cameras, and then this is me doing a return to vendor, -1. So since we've looked at the part, now we understand the part came into the system and left the system from a receipt where we brought it in, and then a vendor return where we sent it back. Let's go back and look what happens when we add a credit. Now I've created 2 different returns, and I'm going to use my battery example to show you real quick. You have 2 options at the top of your part return for what you would do when you get a credit. Now, let's say you sent this battery back and they decide the battery was bad for some reason and you don't get a credit. That's when you use your close no credit option at the top. Now, I will caution you, if you use this option, you cannot go back. It is irreversible. It will close out this return and then it'll take the money and put it in a write-off account. You cannot reopen this return. So let's go ahead and do that and see what it looks like. We'll just refresh. See, everything is grayed out. So the system is understanding that it is closed. No credit is expected. That's as far as we can go. So let's say with the second one, our camera, that we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a vendor credit. So ADI has decided that this particular bullet camera is bad, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to give us a credit back for it. So we're going to choose our create vendor credit at the top, and then we're going to choose save. Now we'll just make up an erroneous ADI number saying that they're going to give us some credit. And let's say they do it for the same amount and it's on today's date. So here's our camera. Our quantity is 1. Make sure always that your total matches top and bottom. And then we can hit apply and then save. And then we'll go back in and look at our return. Now our credit is entered and our accounting data is locked, meaning that we know that we got a credit back. So we know we sent it back and we know that we got a credit back. So let's talk about expenses versus materials real quick. Understanding which tab to use is an important task to anyone who is ordering parts on a daily or weekly basis. When putting in a purchase order, you should be asking yourself, do I need to count these parts at inventory time? And if the answer is yes, then you should look at the part in the parts section. And if the answer is no, you should be looking in the expense tab. So a good example would be freight. Freight's always an expense. So we go ahead and look at the purchase order. Our expense tab lives here, and these are our drop-down options. These are all the different expenses we can choose from. Most often, most companies are going to have you choose from cost of goods. So something in here. Keep in mind, if you need to order the part from a vendor, the chances are you're going to need to reference the part number. So let's go back to the parts section here. So if you're going to buy something, let's say from ADI, they are going to need a part number. So if it's a camera or camera housing or something like that, let's put it in here. But if it's going to be like freight or taxes or something like that, let's put it in the expense section. Another thing to think about is not just ordering from ADI, but let's say you have your technicians and they go out and they purchase stuff on the daily, let's say from Home Depot, Best Buy, something like that. Depending on your company's policy on how much money is spent, you can put some of those parts, they would technically be parts, but you could put them in as expenses. It depends on how granular you want your company to be. Our rule of thumb was pretty much anything over $50 got put in as a part number because we wanted to be able to track the part all the way through its life cycle through our company. And then in a year from now, hey, what was that part on such and such a job? Well, if I only put it in as an expense item, how would you ever find it? Then you got to go looking through receipts and everything, and it makes a very painful process. So, best rule of thumb that we always found was just put it in as a part and reference where you got it from and maybe put some notes in it. And then you'll be able to find it later on down the road. It makes things a lot easier. However, expenses are nice too. Zip ties, tape, rubber gloves, booties that the guys wear in houses, those little shoe booties, stuff like that is a good thing to put in the expense item. So here's another real world scenario that I've seen often. Somebody will come in and they'll decide that they are going to bill for something before they actually physically receive it. So they'll go ahead and they'll go in here and they'll make a bill. And what I want to stress is that if you're just making a bill and you don't have a receipt to match to it, if it's an inventoried item, you can't add the parts. You see that? So then the only thing you can do is put in erroneous GL accounts and match the cost to that GL account. That is not correct. That is not what we want to be doing, especially like in our real world scenario here. Let's say, for example, we ordered a battery. Once we do this and we make the bill, it's going to be put up to pay. So if somebody goes in from your AP department and decides to pay it, it's going to be locked and then there's nothing that you can do about it. So the correct way to go ahead and bring all these in is like we talked about before. You would make a purchase order and then go ahead and make a receipt and make a bill. Do you have to make a purchase order to make a receipt? No, you can go ahead and you can make a new receipt. But it just depends on your company, your company's policy. We always made purchase orders just because then everybody was on the same playing field and everybody knew where all the parts went. So make sure that you put in these receipts first. And then once you put the receipt in, you can go ahead and you can make a bill to it. Now, if all you're doing is making a bill for an expense, the difference would be, like, let's say we're paying a phone bill. We're not going to make a receipt to pay a phone bill. If I'm going to pay AT&T, I'm just going to go ahead and make a bill. But if I'm going to order a part and I have to inventory that part and it's in this part section, I have to have a receipt match the bill. Otherwise, it won't work. So I do see people tripped up on this often, actually. So make sure that you are making your, if your company decides to go down the route to make a purchase order, make your purchase order, then your receipt, then your bill.
Our final section is a review of the flow of inventory in Sedona office.
By looking at the flow of inventory through a business. Let's start with a signed contract from our sales team. The project is in its beginning stages, so it's built into Sedona office. We start this process by creating a purchase order and checking our available stock. Any parts that are not in stock will need to be added to the PO. The purchase order is then sent to the vendor and our job box is created. Now we are waiting for our parts to arrive. Then our parts arrive. The packing slip is used to check the quantity and the part numbers against the original order. This process ensures we receive the correct parts for the project. Then we create the receipt. This is when we receive the parts into Sedona office. If a part is not on a packing slip, it would not be received. This is achieved by placing a 0 in the quantities section. When learning the program, a trick is to zero out all the part quantities and then match each part on the packing slip with the correct part on the receipt. Fill in the correct quantity and move down the list. Save when you're finished. To keep accurate records, you can scan all packing slips into the Documents section. Now that the receipt has been saved, place all the parts in the job box. Since the boxes products are shipped in cannot be written on, a trick is to print a job ticket out and highlight each part when it's placed in the box. This system allows the inventory specialist the ability to glance at the job boxes and know which projects are ready to be scheduled. Now we need to get ready to pay our vendor. We achieve this by making the bill in Sedona office. Most often our AP clerk would have the vendor invoice. Project is underway. The job box is leaving your company's warehouse. To accurately record part on-hand quantities, now is the time to issue parts to the job. Issuing parts to the job pulls parts out of your inventory. Our project is now complete, so we must start the process of closing out the job. The inventory specialist looks through the parts and starts the process of returning those parts back to stock. This ensures that the part on-hand total goes back up. The parts are then placed back into inventory. When looking at the overview of numbers 1 through 4, they work in a system from 1 through 4. From the creation of the PO to the paying of the bill. If you skip a step, there might be issues. Remember, you cannot generate a bill with parts in it unless you make a receipt first.
Thank you for all of the questions that came through today. They will be answered, and that information will be available in the webinar section of our Sedona Office Knowledge Base by the end of the week. Make sure to reference our knowledge base, which is available through the help option within the Sedona Office program and can also be accessed from our support page at boldgroup.com. Keep an eye out for another inventory webinar later this year to cover costing and physical inventory. Thank you for attending today. Have a great day.